Okay, good afternoon to all. So I just would like to say on behalf of Tibet Museum of Central Tibetan Administration, I would like to welcome you all to the Tibet Museum's bi-monthly Tibet Awareness Talk series. And indeed today I'm very honored to have with us the guest speaker, Mr. Claude Arbula. So he will talk on the topic the India-Tibet boundary, the historical background, and the Sino-Indian dispute and current prospects. So before I hand over the session to the guest speaker, I would like to, for your information, I would like to talk a little bit about Claude Arbula. So Claude Arbula is a French-born author and journalist and historian and Tibetologist, born in 1949 in Angoulême, which is in France, who lives in currently he lives in the Ora Valley, India, and he's the author of several books, including The Fate of Tibet, When Big Insects Eat Small Insects, and several articles on Tibet and China and India and Indo-French relations. So he's also his real quest started in the 1972 with a journey to the Indian Himalayas, and since then he has been an enthusiastic student of the history of Tibet, China and the subcontinent. And after graduating as a dental surgeon from the Bordeaux University in 1974, he decided to come to India, and then Mr. Claude Arbula regularly writes on the geopolitics of the region and environment and the Indo-French relations. So currently he's also a distinguished fellow Center of Excellence for Himalayan Studies, Shiv Nadar University, and which is in Delhi. And he held a Field Marshal K.M. Karaba Chair of Excellence of the United Service Institution of India. So this is a short biography of Mr. Claude Arbula. So without taking much time, I would like to hand over the session to our guest speaker and kindly commence today's session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tedola. I'm very happy to be here because last time they asked me to be on video, this virtual link. I don't like not to see the people I'm talking to. When talk is finished, they switch off and you're out. So I like to meet people and see people. So I'm very happy. Thank you for inviting me. So you must have been reading in newspaper since 2017 there was a big clash between the Indian Army and the Chinese Army in Doklam, and since May of 2020 there is a big confrontation in Ladakh. 60,000 soldiers from each side are facing each other, including in the winter by minus 30 or 40. So I will try to explain the background of this dispute. More recently, China, it was in the news last month, has changed the name. You know, any colonial empire like to change the name of the place. Our Puducherry became Pondicherry, Mumbai became Bombay, Kolkata became Calcutta. Recently, the government has changed. So what the Chinese who are occupying Tibet are doing, they're changing the name of the place. And so that after a certain time, 30, 40 years, you will remember only the Chinese name and you will believe that it has always been Chinese. So I've been fighting with many people, including some people in the government, that to take back the original name. And this China is doing on a very, very large scale. And not only that, but they're claiming a large part of the Indian territory, in particularly in the northeast, in that state of Arunachal Pradesh. And this state, they have included within their own county or their own province in Tibet. So not only they're occupying Tibet, but they're changing the name and they claiming large part of the Indian territory as part of the Chinese territory. According to them, whatever has been one day Tibetan is Chinese today. So that's creating a lot of problem and confrontation with India. And even Tibet, they have changed the name. They call Xikang. Since 2 months, they have officially changed the name. And all the media, when you read the Chinese media, their newspaper or their website, Tibet is no more Tibet. And they're trying to impose that name Xishan instead of Tibet. So I think it's very important that organizations like museum or the city really fight to get back the old original name of Tibet. Now, for centuries and centuries, there was no border issue. It was the most peaceful border that one can imagine. And that Himalayan mountain, you can see sometime in the mountain the ridge line. But this ridge line was crossed by monks, by traders, by diplomats. And there were passes, and people would cross, and there was no clash, and there was no army, and there was no police even until mid-50s when Chinese invaded in 51 Tibet. But till the mid-50s, there was absolutely no police. You didn't need a Aadhaar card; it was not existing, but you didn't need any passport or anything to travel. For example, to the holy mountain of Kailash, where for most Indian Lord Shiva is residing. The reason why, because of the Tibet was a buffer zone between China. So today in a newspaper you see no Indian boundary dispute. In fact, there was no Sino-Indian. It was Tibet in India boundary. And I think now the government should start again, call it the Tibet boundary, the Tibet border, not the Chinese border. That landmass of China was very, very big comparatively to the landmass of China, what is today the People's Republic. It's about roughly 25% of the landmass. So that country, which was a buffer zone, a natural buffer zone, a geographical buffer zone because of the height of the plateau, and also a political buffer zone that there was no need of any police or anything, was protecting northern India and all the state, what is today Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Uttarakhand, Himachal or Ladakh, against any invasion or any confrontation. So the big change took place in 1950-51 when Chinese invaded Tibet. It was certainly one of the reasons why Mao Zedong decided to invade that country, to be on the plateau, because strategically to be higher is always an advantage, that the guy who is lower he has more difficulty to fight or to conquer. There's a fantastic exhibition here on the map that you should all see, and some of the maps, what is interesting, that Tibet was a blank. Now most of the maps you have here are from the 20th century. There's maybe 1 or 2 maps of the 19th century, but most of them. That French map here, he says I can move, of 18th century. There's a blank. There was nothing, nobody, no surveyor, no traders, nobody had gone this area, and it was a blank. So even the Tibetans, they were not very good at doing map, and I'll show you after some maps. And even the British, when they stay for 200 years in India, but when they were doing their map in Dehradun, there was a survey of India. Today the survey of India is still in Dehradun, and they're still producing the map, the official map of for the government of India. But the British in the 19th century had started mapping the Himalayas, and they were not showing any boundaries. So it created a problem when India became independent in 1947. There was no official map of the boundaries. Now, I was looking in that exhibition, that beautiful exhibition outside, but there's no map of Tibet. Very recently, a book has been published in England with a map which has been found by a scholar from the 19th century, when Lama went all over from Lhasa to western Tibet, Nari, Nari Kosum, and to Ladakh, and he traveled and he mapped. But you see the map, you don't see any border or anything like that. And that is the map between, at the border where today there's a clash between India and China, and Demchok. It's in Ladakh. It's the easternmost part of Ladakh on the Indus River, when the Indus River enters India. So you see the Indus River. This map actually are rivers. Today the north is on the top and the south is at the bottom. In that map it's rivers. But whatever, there's no border. So people, the monk who did that map, that lama, he just drew the villages, he drew the encampment of nomads, he put yaks and the small river, the small Nala, but no border. So actually in 1947, India inherited that no border with China. Similarly, some of the first maps I have not seen here, but some are from the missionaries who went in the 18th, 19th century in Tibet to convert the Tibetan. It didn't work because Tibetans were too strong in their belief in Buddhism. It didn't work very well, but they went there and they did some good job, at least in mapping, if not in converting. Converting, it didn't work. But again, these maps are rather vague. They are not really showing any detail that today is necessary for demarcating a border, especially when you have a neighbor like China who is aggressive. China is aggressive in South China Sea. China is aggressive on each and every of its border. So unless you have a detailed map, that you'll have a lot of problem. One of the first Tibetan map is the map that Mr. Chakapa was the finance minister of the Tibetan government before 47. He later became His Holiness representative in Delhi, and in 62, when he was in Delhi, he published that map. It's similar to some of the maps which are shown there. It's all based on the Indian survey of Dehradun, the survey of India. But it's the first time that map is published. Of course, the British had published, like Sir Charles Bells, one of the negotiators of the Shimla Convention in 1914. He published a map which is shown there. You have really a good collection of maps here. Now, how do you define a border? Because the case came, nobody knew before, nobody had thought of defining a border. There was no border, there were routes. You take a route, you take the routes from Lhasa to Leh, for example, in Ladakh. But there's no border. But there's what we call a customary border, means we know people from Ladakhi who are going to Tibet or Tibetan coming to Ladakh, they knew that when they cross a certain place, either a river or something, they are in the other countries. Now, usually, to define a border, you, especially after the British arrive in India, you use the watershed. Watershed is where the water, the parting of the water. If the water goes that side, and the ridge line define the border, and it works in most of the places in Himalaya. But the border can be defined also by a pass, like you have the Natula or Jalep line in Sikkim, you have Bumla in Arunachal Pradesh, Shipkila in Himachal. So a pass can define a border. You cross the pass, you're in the other. There's sometimes some clash in Sikkim, for example, because there's one pass which is 1.5 kilometers long, Nakula, and Chinese are trying to push also the border more completely on their side, what is they occupy. A river, it's in the middle of the river. Between France and Germany, for example, you have a river Rhine, and middle of the river is the border. Middle of lake also, between France and Switzerland. But more importantly for the Himalaya, is the pasture, a grazing ground. You send your yaks in one place, so it is your territory. So, but the issue is that sometime over the century, today one village is very strong, he will sing his yak, and after 20 years, 30 years, another village will become stronger, or the headman will become stronger. But usually it has worked like that in many places. And the Tibetan, they don't believe, or they don't think of this watershed business. It's only introduced in 1890 by the British, but they were believing only in grazing rights. You have you're grazing one pasture, that is your country. That village is sending the yaks in that pasture, it is your country. Now, that watershed principle, I've explained that in 1890 there was the first treaty between, but British were never very straight because they were a colonial empire. They were thinking like a colonial empire, but they had a colonial mind. And instead of signing with the stakeholder in northern Sikkim, with the state of Sikkim, we was independent at that time, or in southern Sikkim with Bhutan, they signed with the Manchu. But there was no Manchu around. So they signed a border following the watershed, and they start putting pillars. The Tibetans were very unhappy. They said, we have not been informed, we have not been Sikkimese, and Tibetans were very happy. Tibetans, they just broke the pillars, finished. So the British changed their tactics, and they start putting kinds, means pile of stone, like you have the money stone, they put pile of stone. So the entire border on northern Sikkim is still today, they mark with 23 pile of stone. Though the Tibetan for years, they didn't believe in that watershed. They said, no, we will, wherever we are grazing, we will keep sending this. So you imagine the complexity of this issue. And as long as the Tibetan were the neighbor, the northern neighbor of India, it could be discussed. It could be, it would, years after years it was discussed, but there was no clash. You don't have to post a division of the army with 15,000 soldiers, or even a brigade with 7,000, 8,000. Now, because the Tibetan didn't accept that watershed principle, and also they were not accepting to discuss, because Tibetan wanted to remain secluded. That was one of the big blunder that independent Tibet did. Many years ago, I wrote one book, The Karma of Tibet. I think to want to remain close, not to want to have contact with anybody, thinking that their religion will be spoiled if they have contact with any other foreign countries. As a result, when the world started changing in the 40s, 50s, when India became independent, China became People's Republic of China, Tibet was not ready, because they didn't want to have any diplomatic relation with any country in the world. So in beginning of 20th century, they even refused to open the letter sent to the Dalai Lama by the British government. So the British, they sent the youngest man, a young captain, with 700-800 British soldiers with guns and everything, and they just occupied Tibet. They went to Lhasa, and they forced on the Tibetan convention in July 1904. That was good in one way for the Tibetan. Their army was smashed, they did not exist, but because during this convention they were recognized as a separate country by the British. And at that time, the Chinese representative, the ambassador of the court of Manchu court, was there in Lhasa. He didn't object. And but in 1910, China started pushing, and some warlord in Sichuan start entering into India's territory. So the bells start ringing in London. They said, we have to do something, we have to fix the border, and they called for a tripartite conference, which lasted 6 months, and actually we defined the northern border in northeast, which is called the Mac Mountain line. But what is interesting that you have here the minutes of some of the meetings. They're 20, 30 minute meetings like that, and every whatever the British said or the Chinese said or the Tibetans say is minuted and recorded, but the Tibetan plenipotentiary, the Chinese plenipotentiary Ivan Chen and Sir Henry McMahon, the Foreign Secretary of India, sat at the same level. It means that at that time in 1914, China recognized Tibet at the same level than them. They said, you don't sit 6 months with another country if you don't recognize this country. So now the fact they say that we don't recognize Tibet as an independent country is afterthought. In 1914, that is a proof. Ultimately, they sang a line is the only place on the Indo-Tibet boundary where there's a sign map, and you have many examples of the map, the different section of the map outside and the exhibition. And you have the seal of Loshen Chatra, who was the Prime Minister of Tibet, sent by the 13th Dalai Lama, and the Foreign Secretary of India, Sir Henry McMahon. So all along the border, the 4,056 kilometers of border between India and China today, that is only portion in Arunachal where there's a map. All the other portion in Ladakh or in Uttarakhand or in Himachal, there's no map. Now China changed the goals, the post, and created in end of the 1930s a new province called Xikang. And for the first time in that province, they included what is today Arunachal Pradesh. Today, China is claiming the entire Arunachal Pradesh, but the claim of Communist China, of today's China, dates from 1930s when they created that province, and some cartographer included till the border of Assam, till what we call the foothills of Assam, they included this part of Tibet. I go fast because what is interesting in that map, that which dates from the India's independence, that it shows the pocket of influence of the Tibetan in northern India. Now, influence means nothing because, in terms of delineating the border, because you can say that Sikkim has a Tibetan influence, Ladakh has a Tibetan influence, Kinnaur or Spiti has a Tibetan influence. But anyway, since they are claiming the entire Arunachal Pradesh, that map of 1945-46 is interesting. It shows the only influence. All the rest was tribal area, which had absolutely nothing to do with Tibet in terms of culture, language, religion, and any. But the yellow pocket are certainly connected with Tibet religiously, and that the monastery, like the monastery in Ladakh, were often connected with some monastery in Tibet. Similarly, in Tawang, which is the largest section, the main monastery was connected with the monastery of Drepung Losoling. Now, the fact today we are facing that problem in Ladakh and we are facing the problem elsewhere on the border is that it has never been an agreed border. In 1684 there was a treaty with Ladakh. It was not recognized by the Chinese. Similarly, in 1842, in 1890, I mentioned in Sikkim, the Tibetans were not invited, Sikkimese were not invited. Similarly, in 1904, the Chinese were not invited, and it was repudiated by China. Similarly, if you go all along the different conference or discussion about the border, there was always one party which out of the three we have never been included. Therefore, there is that clash today and that doubt that China has been using it fully. And New Delhi came in 1950, October 50. They invited Western Tibet. They came from 4 different directions, and all their posters shows how happy were the Tibetan, which is absolutely not a fact. But the propaganda of China is very good, and they show how Tibetans were happy to receive the Chinese troops. Actually, there was a big problem when the Chinese troop came. the first 20,000 troops came to Tibet, to the plateau. After 1 year, there was no food, enough food. And it's India, it's Nehru's government, who had to supply for 4 years food to the Chinese People Liberation Army to allow them to survive on the Tibetan plateau. So that's ironic, because in 1962, the same troops attacked India. And many people in the government, mainly Sardar Patel, but many others, like the President of India, Rajendra Prasad, and other politicians like Rajaji or K.M. Munshi or Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, they saw that they didn't see a tragedy for Tibet. They didn't see that Tibet was, they didn't think of the Dalai Lama or having to escape, or the Tibetan have take refuge in India or elsewhere. They thought of the Indian border. These leaders saw in the loss of a peaceful border immediately. They said, now there's a danger of the border. For centuries we have lived peacefully with the Tibetan. Now a new neighbor, we have to do something to reinforce this border. So Sardar Patel wrote a long prophetic letter just 4 weeks before he passed away to the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister Nehru really believed that India and China should be brother, Indi Chini Bye Bye, and India and China, if they work together and are in harmony with each other, the world will be in peace. But it didn't turn up like that, because I think he has really misunderstood the motivation of Nehru. In India, we had not ever occupied Tawang, which was south of the McMahon line, of the 1914 line, immediately took action, and the governor of Assam, Daulat Ram, sent the Assam Rifle with one young Major Bob Katting, one young army officer from Manipur, and they occupied and took over the administration of Tawang. That is how today, Tawang is part of the Indian territory. If they had not moved very fast, just 3 months after Chinese invasion, I think Tawang would be today Chinese. And for the first time, Bob Katting and all the Assam Rifle, they discovered the border. Actually, because that McMahon line that you have seen in 1914 was very vague. First, there's a lot of mistake. They didn't have satellite imagery like we have today. They didn't have the latest technology and only 2 officers, Captain Bailey and Captain Morshid, they went on horse. They went all over the border, and in places they've done huge mistake. Sometimes these mistakes are in favor of India, sometimes they are in favor of China. So, but it's Bob Katting first who some of this area, like Bumla, in that case, Bumla is, if you go to Arunachal Pradesh, the Bumla is the main pass going to north, to Tibet, to Tsona, and he put the border in the correct position. And the turning point was the Panchshir Agreement. We must have heard that in China was not happy that India would not recognize Tibet as part of China, so an agreement was took place. For 5 months there were negotiations, and Panchshir means the 5 principles, and the agreement was for the transit into Tibet, for the people entering into Tibet, and for people going in for pilgrimage, and for the trade in Tibet. So basically it was an agreement just between Tibet and India, but in the title itself, for the first time India admitted that Tibet was occupied or part of China. They said the agreement between the Republic of India and the Tibet region of China. So it was the first time India agreed that Tibet was part of China, and since then they have never changed the position, very, very unfortunately. And at the same time, in 1954, the maps were published in Dehradun by the Survey of India, show undefined boundary. Because, as I mentioned earlier, the British had left the legacy of not marking the border. So this undefined boundary has created endless problem, and all the confrontation which is taking place in Ladakh now since 2020, but many clashes took place before, is because that undefined boundary. China said, you don't know where's your border, what is That's your fools. So it doesn't belong to you if you don't know that you put it on defend. And during that treaty of Panchil, there was no map exchange, and there were 6 passes which are named, and actually where the passes are named, there have never been clashes. But the red one are Nitila, Manala, Kongri, Bangri, they have been named in the treaty. There's no clash. All the other passes which have not been named. And China was, during these 4 or 5 months of negotiation, I have gone through all the paper, every minutes of this negotiation. They didn't want to name passes. They didn't want to name Demchok, for example, in the dark. And as a result, years later, there was confrontation and clashes in a place which are not named. But the treaty was signed in April of 1954. 2 months after, China started intruding and crossing the line. And since then, mainly in the central sector, means Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, and places which are totally obvious, like Chipkila, which is in Himachal Pradesh, and you cross the pass, you're in Tibet. China started claiming areas south of the passes. Though this pass had been used for centuries and centuries by traders, by diplomats, by monks, everywhere was using these passes. Everyone knew that you cross the pass, you're in Tibet. They start claiming things. So they realized, the government stopped realizing that they would have a problem in the future. The main problem came in for 8 years later in '62 when there was a border war between China and India. And at the same time, India realized that this border has to be administered properly. Many of this area was just jungle. There's no road. Even today, the road since 3-4 years already have started being laid. But for years and years, there was no road in that area. They created an administrative service called, like you have the IAS, Indian Administrative Service. They created the Indian Foreign Administrative Service, Frontier Administrative Service. They put remarkable fellows. Usually, in India we have the babus, this guy in the office, and who take decisions just looking at their computer. But these guys, they were working, living with the villagers, and very remarkable people, and they did a study of all these unknown area. They would send to their headquarters hundreds of pages reports to their headquarters, detailing. And we know, because of these reports, unfortunately it's very, very difficult to find them all. We know the life of these tribes, and their custom, and their everything about them, and the number of small villages and the clash between the villages. So that is quite remarkable. And I will go fast. I mentioned that one of the first dispute was in the central sector. There was one pass called Tsamchokla, and the Chinese started claiming south of the pass. I'll go fast, and today it's still disputed. So most of these things which started being disputed in 1950, 54, 55 are still disputed today. Barauti is the same thing, and China, when they start disputing, they didn't know where that pass was located, that area was located, what was the superficie of the place. So when China and India negotiated in 58, they kept asking them, tell us where they didn't know the place. So, but they just, they like to extend their territory. I think it's in their DNA, China, they like to extend their territory, and they keep claiming this thing. And everything changed when His Holiness arrived in India. I was lucky that last month I went to the right on the border, and still since 1959 there's one board there engraved where His Holiness crossed the border in one post called Chutangmu, and the border is a few kilometers north in a place called Kenzimane. And traditionally when you cross that bridge is still existing. Dokung Sampa, you were in Tibet, the other side, and this side you were in India. So the arrival of His Holiness changed everything. They became very, very aggressive. That correspondence increased. They started claiming not only in Arunachal Pradesh, which was called Difa at that time, but also in Ladakh, many places, and that starts turning sour, especially because India had received His Holiness as an honored guest. Nehru sent a letter to the border, to the official who received him at the border, saying you'll be an honored guest. And till 1959, he has always been an honored guest of the government of India. And China slowly started changing the claims. In 1956, they had a claim. In 59 September, they had another claim. And December, they had another claim. And after 62, they had another claim. And now in 2020, for example, in one of the places called Depsang, they claiming further south of the line. So you see on that map how they change the post. So that's one of the difficulty when you deal with China. And I don't know, recently His Holiness said that he has some contacts, but main issue for me, who have really gone through what they have done in the past, they are changing the post. So that you negotiate something, you agree to something, and post is changed after 2 months or after 2 years. So that's what happened in 1951 when 17 points agreement between the Tibetan delegates and the Chinese, and which was signed under duress. The Chinese forged the seal, but each time they've been changing the post. And 54 Panchil agreement, 58 in Barawati, and later on in Ladakh and elsewhere. And some of the maps show that actually there were 3 places where China said they didn't agree, and it's these 3 places they keep attacking India. And in December 9 of last year, 2022, there was a big clash again at one night, and China tried to change the border again. They were pushed back by the Indian troops. Now the Indian troops are much better prepared. I don't think they will get bullied. I don't think, in Galwan in June of 2020, there was a clash and many Indians died, many Chinese died also. They didn't tell their people that. They say 4 casualties from the Chinese side. There was 40, 45. But they will keep nagging and making problem for India. Something interesting in March, just 10 days after His Holiness left, there was a Central Committee Politburo meeting, enlarged Politburo in Shanghai, and Mao Zedong said, let the government of India commit all the wrong for now. When the time comes, we will settle accounts with them. So they did it 3 years later in 1962. There was a battle, and the 700 soldiers died from the Indian side, just in that sector. 4,000 were taken prisoner. Altogether, 3,000 Indian soldiers died. A couple of thousand, it's more difficult to know on the Chinese side, but just because of a border for a question of 1 or 2 kilometers. There's one ridge called the Tagla Ridge. China said it belongs to India, to China, and India said. So from the centuries ago, where there's no border, no police, nobody having to man this border, because people were coming from Tibet along the river. They didn't care for the ridge on that side or the ridge on that side. They care if there was a grazing pasture, they could send the yaks, that's all. But it became a place of confrontation, and till today, there's 1.5 lakh of soldiers both sides, 150,000 both sides. So it's a tragedy, but it's a result of Tibet invasion by China. And maybe if India had reacted, but we cannot rewrite history. If India had reacted in 1950, done something and stopped the Chinese advance in Tibet, it would have been different, or helped Tibet in the UN. and but India they don't want to do, because India believe in the friendship between China and India. And the present, you see what is claimed today by the old orange place are claimed, are Indian territory claimed by China. So clash keep happening, and they will keep continue to happen. Now it's very difficult to find a solution between the Chinese line, that line of given the map given by Zhou Enlai, the Chinese Prime Minister in '62, shows 3 places. Is where in May of 2020 there was a clashes. That map is so vague you don't see, but the Chinese generals knew that by advancing the map, advancing the line by 1 kilometer, they would have a better position to position their gun and to check what was going on, monitor what was going on the Indian side, in particularly the road going to the Karakoram road, or Karakoram Pass that India was building. So this Galwan, Godhra, and even in the Pangong Lake, that was a question of few hundred meters that Chinese wanted to have a better position. So they thought it would just pass like that, and unfortunately India reacted, and very soon, and it's still statu quo, and still the confrontation is taking place. Just I will conclude. How many minutes I have to?
25 minutes.
Okay. So one of the issues that you heard, what is LAC, line of actual control. Line of actual control is where each army, each country is having the control. You have the control up to there. It's different from the international border. International border, it's your claims. Like China's claiming the entire Arunachal Pradesh, so their IB, their international border for them, is at the bottom of Arunachal, at the frontier of Assam. LAC is where you control, so it should be easy to fix. Unfortunately, there has never been map, and today all newspapers, each time there's a problem, a confrontation, an issue, are discussing where the LAC, but that LAC has never been defined. So now I've listed some of the agreement between India and China. 93 agreement, maintenance of peace and tranquility. 96 confidence building measure in the military field. 2005 guidelines to fix the boundary question. 2012 establishment of a committee, working committee for the cooperation on the border. Never every of this agreement, official agreement signed by India and China, they mention the LAC. LAC is never defined, it's not a single map. So I asked one of the senior diplomat who negotiated in '96, I said, why you have not put that map on the thing? When you pass a law in the parliament, first thing you define the law, what is the object of the law. So the object of LAC, a map should be appended and defining very detailed, never. So the diplomat told me, Prime Minister wanted to tell the parliament that an agreement has been signed. We didn't have time to do the map. As a result, the Chinese so it goes like that, because India is a democracy, political party, whoever they are, they want to tell the parliament that the issue has been solved. So they said, we'll do the map later. As a result, China never let India do the map. Only now, after the Ladakh confrontation, several places have been mapped and agreement have been found. But 2 places, Demchok and at the border of Tibet, and Demsang in the border of Xinjiang or the Karakoram Pass, they have not. And I can tell you they will not be in 10-15 years. Another issue that I mentioned briefly, that line drawn, brought in Shimla Convention to McMahon and signed by the Tibetan Prime Minister and McMahon, is not corresponding sometimes to the watershed. So here you have 3 lines, one yellow line which is the MapMount line, the official line. Red line, which corresponds the Google map that is correspond to the watershed, and the green line, which is official international border for the survey of India. So if one day India and China have to find a solution, they will have to tally these three lines. This is not easy. I can tell you that it's not easy. It will not happen soon. So, and these 19 rounds of talks in Ladakh after the May 2020 confrontation, it resulted in a partial delineation of the line, because army, they are not like diplomats, they're down to earth, because they know what is meaning 1 meter and, or 500 or even 200 meter or 50 meter. So they have few places have been now corrected and signed. The maps have been signed by two parties. Unfortunately, two areas, Damshok and Damsang, have not been signed. And even the Chinese today, because Xi Jinping is in a very weak position. You must have seen last few weeks his defense minister has been purged or sacked, or we don't know what happened to him, and as well as his minister of foreign affairs. So Xi Jinping internally is not in a position to do compromise and give back what they have taken in 2022. That is a very, very big issue. So I conclude by saying, will His Holiness see again a Tibet without border like it was when he was born in 1935, as it was also like that in 47 when India became independent. But unfortunately, Mao came in power in October 1949, and everything changed. Mao moved extremely fast on the border. First in Xinjiang, was called Eastern Turkestan at that time, which was a more or less independent nation, and in Tibet was fully independent and invaded, but the world didn't react. And that's why we have a beautiful museum in Dharamsala today. But I wish that Tibetan one day can go back and do a similar museum in Lhasa. We will come and visit them. Thank you.
So with this, we have come to the end of today's session. And before concluding the sessions, we have 10 minutes of QA session. So among the audience, if you have any questions to ask regarding today's topic, please kindly take the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes, I'm a little bit, I don't understand what is this number signify.
Oh, because in the book, the scholar who has studied the map has annotated, has put the number and the name of the area. Sometimes it's just translation. But like they put here, Demchok, they put 386. There's maybe 500 or 600 names of place that the scholar who has written the book, commenting on the map in detail, has put numbers and things. In Demshok, the border was a customary border. For centuries, the caravan would go, and there was a nala, a small river, charting nala, and they knew it's you have the Indus River, and you have the nala. And when you cross that nala, you're in Ladakh or vice versa. So there was no doubt. But at that time, this caravans going, they didn't care for the. One side you have the Kailash range, and the other side you have the Ladakh range, very high, and the Indus is in between. On about 40 kilometers, you have both range on the side of the Indus, and after the Indus take a turn, 90-degree turn. So these people, they were going to Tibet, or Tibetans were coming to Ladakh for trading, wool or salt or whatever. They didn't care for the thing. But when China came, they had a totally different mindset. Their mindset was more a strategic mindset. You're on the ridge, and you can control militarily the thing. But it was not the way that between neighbors. So the point is that when you have a good neighbor, your life is easier. When you have a bad neighbor, one guy who keeps creating problem on your next in your neighbor on your flat or whatever, you get having a miserable life. Here it has taken proportion much larger that we have a confrontation, and in Galwan in June of 2020. By the way, it was 15 June, it was Xi Jinping's birthday, so one local commander took upon himself to push the Indian troops a little bit out, and they resisted, and many of the Jawan, the soldiers, they fell in the river and at night, and so India lost 20 soldiers. But China, they don't have the courage or whatever to say the number. They first say for a couple of months there's no casualty, after they admitted 4. But in fact, we know that there's between 40 and 45 Chinese also. So that was a big tragedy, and I think, and one of the agreements I've mentioned, the troops who are very close to the border, they cannot be having guns or something like that, of machine gun. So they use these medieval masses or these from the Middle Age, these weapons, and they beat each other like that. It's happened also in December 2022 in Yangtze sector in north of Taiwan. So the Chinese army has equip itself with this whole thing because they follow that agreement. They don't have a weapon because they know that if they use a weapon, is some 10 Indian soldiers are killed or vice versa, that could be a much larger confrontation and clash, and really something tragic. This I wrote myself this, but not the number.
Okay.
So, take one question.
I think it seems like a question, but it's more like a clarification. When your presentation, when it deals with the Arunachal Tibet border, you just started the Chinese claim since
30s.
1930s, right? I think we have to go beyond that because it's clearly written in the Tao Ila's letter to the African and Asian nation in 1962, where he says that Menyul, Huyul, Thayul, right now all this in Arunachal. So he says that these are part and parcel of the Tibet, and then like he started like that narrative actually, and then but you are saying that everything starts from the Shigang province during the Umidang Bridge. So and also like I had chance to listen one of your commentary to the Global Star or something like that. And another thing is that you are saying that renaming, the China has renaming some places in Arunachal Pradesh. For me, and I think that is for me that is big mistake that we have to understand the whole context. Is that because it seems like it's renaming, but it's for me it's more like revealing the history actually.
It is
Revealing, reveal all, because renaming in the sense like something they changed the name, right? And then, but suppose when you say it's Pangjing is already there. When Tao was under the Tibetan administration since 17th century, there is a Pangjing Dengru, something is like that. So today China is also saying it's a Pangjing. And then Yangar also part and parcel of the 4th district, which is administered by the Tao Monastery when Tao Monastery was under the Tibetan control. So that means like China was very tricky actually. China was very tricky is that China tried to reveal names which are which the Tibetan administration controlled these places before the McMahon line signed.
In Tibet has signed in 1914.
Yeah.
And one time His Holiness told me, I think it's at the time of Bob Ketting entering into Tawang, he said everyone was so excited in Lhasa, they thought Tibet has been invaded. His Holiness said my government were fools. They didn't know, they didn't remember that they had signed. So I'm not saying that Dirang Song or Sangye Song or Pangchen had not been under Tibetan administration before 1914, but once you have signed, you can't keep claiming this area. Because in that case, Ladakh can claim up to Kailash Mansarovar also. So, and I agree with you that this name like Pangchen and all, they are original Tibetan name. But they have changed the pronunciation. Like today, Rikatse for Chigatse, and now all the newspapers start writing Rikatse. So it's a small change very often in pronunciation, like Metok. Metok song, they will say Mutao. Because Chinese can't pronounce Metok, they will say Mutao. So they will transcribe in Pinyin this name. Regarding that Xikang province, I think it has formalized because after the letter you mentioned, it's 1962, December 62. But this, during the war with Japan, many scholars had to leave the mainland and take refuge in Kham. And many of them got married with Kampa ladies and things like that. And they start studying for the first time the history of Kham. And based on that, they drew some maps. And the maps were accepted by the warlord of Sichuan as the real maps of Sichuan's province. Now, 1950, end of 50, when Mao Zedong got to know about these maps, he immediately asked to cyclostyle, and they said that is a map of what they call today Southern Tibet, Nifa, including Nifa. I think the Xikang province has formalized in maps something new, and of course after they can speak of Monyul like that, but you should stick to the 1914 thing. If you start claiming south of the thing, it's very complicated issues, not something simple. Or Zhou Enlai also said it's inherited from history. It's partially true, but at one point there was a decision taken. Now that there's disagreement because the map was not precise enough. Or you see, like I was telling the director, and this map outside there's the fishtail 1 and fishtail 2. The Morshid, the surveyor in 1914, did a big blunder. He didn't follow the watershed, which is straight. He designed 2 fishtail because the local people told him the watershed is going like that and like that. I don't know where that map is. So now, when they wanted to change it back, it was never agreed by the Chinese. But it was. Oh no, it's not. I don't have it on the map. It's the second part of this map. So there's 2 things. It doesn't follow. Actually, geographically, it was very simple. So, but when you have agreed to something, you have to agree to it. You can't.
We don't have much time, so I'll sit down.
You come to Auroville, we'll discuss.
So one last question.
Yeah, I can go on. Yeah.
Please.
So thank you so much, Mr. Claude Abdullah, for your detailed presentation. It's really good to see you again. So my question is can you speak a little bit more about the British policy of acknowledging the sovereignty of Chinese, over Tibet, and at the same time the autonomy of Tibet in relation to Shimla Conference and the 1904 Young Huntsman Expedition?
That the government,
Yeah.
that they agree to the autonomy.
Yeah. So
But officially, Nehru always in the correspondence and everything, first he spoke of a country verging independence. But he said, we want Tibet to have a full autonomy. China said, we will give autonomy. It's called a Tibet Autonomous Region, like the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We have given the status of autonomy. Implemented, what does it mean? That there has never been a party secretary of Tibetan origin. So between what they agree and what they do after, there's a huge gap. But it's true that in 1954, when the Panchil was signed, Nehru believed. He was foolish to believe, because it was pointed by Sardar Patel and others before that it will not work like that. If you read in detail Sardar Patel's note of 7 November 1950, he said very clearly, you can't trust, you have to. But Nehru believed genuinely that autonomy will be respected. And actually, when the case came to the UN in November 1950, they said that the government of India, the representative said, we want autonomy. There was some kind of suzerainty. Now, what means suzerainty? Sovereign, you know, it's a notion of the 19th century, which didn't exist when the world started changing and countries became independent. Because before, the concept of a border was completely different. I was showing that map, old map of the monk in 19th century. There was no concept of the border as it is today. There you do 1 meter, you cross that country or like that. Or you have to put a fence, or you have to unborn it, or like that. So the concept has completely changed. Tibet was not ready maybe for that change, and the government of India didn't realize also, because if they publish in 1954 undefined boundary, mean they didn't realize the importance of having something precise. And also they didn't have the means. The people sent by McMahon, Bailey and Morshid, they didn't have the means to. And for example, north of Tawang, towards Zemintang, people say that some beautiful Mompa girls passed, and they start looking at the girls and they forgot to look at the ridge. So as a result, there was no, they put a straight line till 1950, there was a straight line on the thing. All the 1962 war took place north of that straight line. Because after that, saying that straight line was not correct, they realigned with the ridge. But China had not agreed to that. It's what all this convention and agreement, there was never been an agreement. I'm saying that for the first time in now, with 19 rounds of talk, there's some signed maps. But unless you have a map which is signed, a precise map which is correct, that both parties agree, you don't have an agreement. But basically, there will not be in 20, 30 years, 40 years, there won't be an agreement for the international border, because India cannot afford being in the democracy, matter being discussed in the parliament, cannot afford to have give the accession that India believes it belongs to India, no? And similarly, China will not give away that claim, which is maybe no basis, because in 1914 the situation was clear. But so there can be an agreement on the LAC. And it has progressed in one way since May of 2020, some places. But similarly, an agreement should be signed for the eastern sector, for Arunachal. Now, you know that you imagine that there was negotiation in the 80s and 90s, and eventually in 2000, there was an exchange of maps for the central sector, means Uttarakhand, Bharati, and Chilpika, Himachal Pradesh, and some place in Kinnoor. there was an exchange of map. Means China gave its map and of its perception, and vice versa. So it was agreed. We know what China claims, and China knows what India's claim. Now in Ladakh, in 2002, there was an exchange of map. It lasted 20 minutes. Both parties saw that there was so much gap between the two perceptions that there was 12 places which were totally different. So they withdrew the map, they know map. On the eastern sector in Arunachal, there has never been an exchange of map, never. So it's a problem. But eventually with goodwill, but right now the goodwill doesn't seem to be. After one meeting when Modi went in China and when Xi Jinping came to Mabalipuram, there was good hope that some goodwill could at least fix the LAC. Because each army knows where they are at, no? Not keep changing this post like China has done in the 50s.
I really wish to have going this kind of a very interactive session, Q&A session, but then due to time constraint, we have to stop here. When we conclude, before concluding the today's session, I would like to call our director, Mr. Tenzin, to say some 2 words, as we didn't have much time regarding this, and then offer a small gift as a token of appreciation.
Okay, so first of all, Gotla, you wait?
You have to take back this.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so first of all, let me thank Mr. Claude Apre again, because this is the second time he have humbly accepted our invitation. It was last year, August 2022, that we hosted him virtually here, but this time we are very fortunate and we seized the opportunity that you are
I'm
here.
fortunate.
And we had a very interactive and very, I think, very important topic. And in the beginning, Tsenola had said, he's a scholar and he's an author and Tibetologist. But to me, if I look at his, work, to me he is more than that. He is a courageous writer, because for like almost half a century, he have written more than 2,000 articles, particularly on this three important nations, that is China, India, and Tibet. I think which hold around 50% of the total humanity on this globe. So geopolitically, it is very important. And right now, if we look around the world, there's a stark difference between east and west polarization, and north and south, deepening socio-economic policies. So at such a crucial juncture, we have like people like you who truthfully write about the geopolitical nuances, and that's how I think he become a true champion, or the staunch supporter of Tibet, because he's always been very truthful in saying that whatever we have, we transparently show it across the globe. So I think Claude have seen that, and he have witnessed that. That's why he is continuously like working together with the Tibetan support group and Tibetan fellow around the Tibetan exile community, and I'm very thankful for that. And in the beginning, he said, we must talk, particularly Indian, we must talk. It is an Indo-Tibetan border, because if you happen to go around this Himalayan, the border, there are a lot of ITBP, that is Indo-Tibetan Border Police Forces. None of them says it is Indo-China Border Police Forces. So that clearly shows, we have been building this border because of the Tibet being the border part, counter-border part. So we have to start saying that it is ITBP. Thank you for...
And use Tibetan name also.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding all of us this important thing. And last but not the least, I must say thank you to all the the visitor who came here and make this interactive. And we have tea session after this, so we have 1 more hour, so you can take the individual question to him. And let's have a big round of applause to Mr. Claude Aubrey. And we hope we will see you again next year.
Let's see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.